mention her in this.
That's amazing.
Yep.
That's amazing. Please, 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 next time you talk to her, give her my regards. I have nothing but fond memories of working with her. So please.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Look at y'all culture creators coming back together.
Oh boy.
Look at that.
Remind me to, I'll be pulling your card later, Darien. I'll be pulling.
So we're gonna give the students about 2 more minutes to join, and then I think we could start around like 2:35.
Okay.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashton, and I'm one of the facilitators for this meeting. I just want to confirm they're planning on recording these meetings. Is that okay with everyone?
That's fine.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for checking.
Tiara, where are you based?
I am in Palm Beach, Florida, soon to be Fort Lauderdale. And I was in Atlanta before. That's where I started.
Right. Right. Who are the other RDOs that you're working with now?
Parika Sampson,
Yep.
Steen Smith, Erica Kelly.
Oh, Erica, still in Texas, and Parika's
Yep.
still in Chicago.
Yep. Gertie Simon and Shannon Guild.
I did not know that Gertie became RDO.
She's new. She's new to the role.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, she's great.
Oh, well, you know what? And Shannon came back. I remember when she had left for a bit. Right. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. Very cool. We have a great team.
Yeah, that's a very solid team. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And then our new national diversity officer, so our boss is amazing as well, Raymond Jackson.
Right. And Lauren Zadie's still part of the team, yes?
Lauren Zadie, and then Kara is our big boss, Kara Underwood.
Okay, because I knew it went Kara to Cheryl, but now it's Kara again.
Yep.
Oh, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so we'll connect. Let's connect with all professional links after this for sure.
We love to see it.
No boy, Darien.
All right.
Yeah,
I
so
think we can kind of get started and let the students continue to join as we keep going.
Sure.
So you are in the We're Making Space diversity panel. If you are in that panel, that means you're in the right place. We're talking about how to lead charge and creating diversity and inclusion in our space. And we were really intentional about how we named this. And we didn't call it diversity and inclusion. We called it diversity and belonging, because we wanted people of color, deserve to be in these spaces. And we want to figure out how we can make space for them in these spaces and not just include them in these spaces, but, make sure that, students know how they can create their stories to find their ways within the diversity space. So as we start, I just want to start with everybody just introducing themselves. So I guess we can start with Darien.
Yeah, happy to do that. Thanks, Andrielle. So my name is Darren Lee Beach. I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategy at the global experience agency Huge, based in Brooklyn, New York. I've been working in the advertising world for the past 7 years, starting this year. Started off in new business and digital PR and social media, moved into brand strategy, and then combined my background in brand strategy with my passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and have been bridging that gap ever since to help businesses, specifically agencies like mine, as well as like smaller firms, take diversity, equity, and inclusion from an HR initiative to a business imperative. That's me.
So, Tiara, you want to go?
Sure. I am Tiara Chesmer, and I am Regional Diversity Officer for Wealth Management at Morgan Stanley. I've been with Morgan Stanley for about 4 years now. And before Morgan Stanley, I was at a different firm on the institutional side of the business in New York City for about 10 years. Did a whole bunch of D&I strategies there, but that wasn't my specific role. but always been a passion. So when I came to Morgan Stanley and this opportunity presented itself, I put my foot in the door and got it. And now I'm rocking and rolling and loving the firm.
Awesome. And we have Nadia Jones.
Hi there, everyone. Nadia Jones, principal and founder of Cipher Consulting. I started off my career as a lawyer here in New York, where I'm based, predominantly focusing on labor and employment law. I headed up D&I, equity and inclusion, since known as D&I when I first started at law firms for the first part of my career, for about a little bit under a decade. Then I went off into financial services at Morgan Stanley as their senior diversity officer. So that's where Tiara and our lives kind of intersected, if not in real life, virtually. And then I was a VP of talent and inclusion at Huge. Again, our panelists all have these points of intersectionality before I started my own company in the equity inclusion space. Cipher is a consulting firm in which I advise industries across, quite frankly, skill set, whether that's media or fintech or advertising, legal, in the space of their equity inclusion initiatives. So it's nice to be here, and thank you for inviting me on the panel.
Thank you. Very excited to have you guys. So all of you guys started in a different realm in your careers. So I just want to know what inspired you guys to transition into diversity and inclusion, and the need for that. Okay, cool. Yeah, you want to start?
Sure. So I went to NYU. Obviously, New York is very, very diverse. I worked at a company called Blackstone where it was pretty diverse, but their initiatives around diversity were not at the forefront of the company, meaning they had employee network groups and so on and so forth, but they didn't have actual initiatives to recruit and things like that. So when I transferred to Morgan Stanley and they had these amazing conferences, like our Multicultural Leadership Conference, our Black Leaders Forum, Women's Leadership Summit. So all of these conferences, as well as really strategic strategies to recruit diverse talent, it really sparked a light bulb in me. And I was like, this is where I want to be. I want to see more people that look like me at the table, not only in internships, but in senior leadership positions. And that's what really sparked my my interest into going into D&I.
Yeah, I'll chime in. So I started out, as I said, as a lawyer, and you have in most law firms, dare I say, these kind of like the non-billable requirement, right? And the non-billable requirement is really those hours that are totaled into your firm citizens. So you could be recruiting or mentoring, and that's the work that I actually really enjoyed. Like there was the lawyer kind of gig of like writing briefs and various due diligence and discovery. But for me, I really appreciated the like recruiting and like mentorship aspect. At the time, and this is where I kind of date myself of a particular vintage, law firms were just starting to internalize these roles. And a couple of years into my practice, a woman by the name of Brene Myers, who's actually now the head of D&I at Netflix, came into our firm. We had just won this award, and she congratulated us, and she said, you guys have so much more work to do. And I walked up to her afterwards, and this is a Black woman in like early 2000s, who was just like statuesque and so super smart, and telling my firm that they needed to get their sugar honey iced tea together in the space of equity inclusion work. And I walked up to her and I was like, I want your job when I grow up. And she was like, learn this industry, and your easiest pivot is to go into D&I within the industry that right, as a former practicing attorney. And that was it. That's kind of how it started. I was like, this is the work I want to do. All the side hustle of being like the strong firm citizen translated so well for me, particularly as a queer Black woman, and really kind of focusing on those initiatives that I would have benefited from in that role. And so that's what kind of got me going, where I stayed for, a little bit under almost about 7 years at a firm.
Dope. And Darien, how did you start?
I am cheesing so hard because Nadia's story is more or less like how I found my pivot into this, and she was my Renee essentially. So when we met at Huge, it was the first time that I had worked at a company that had someone dedicated to this type of work. And it was my first time sitting in a training of Nadia's where, you know, like right out the gate, Nadia doesn't hold it, like pull back any punches. She's just like, yo, look, everybody, like I am like Black, queer woman, like checks off all of her boxes and just like, look, I just want you to understand like bop, 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 bop. And so we can just like hit the ground running for you. Plus I'm a lawyer, like, and I was just like, yo, I feel something right now. Like I'm seeing someone just like live in their power. And at the time I think like a lot of underrepresented individuals in predominantly white industries, we find ourselves I found myself kind of just like doing a lot of the work in a grassroots way. And it was actually during the time that Nadia and I had met at Huge that a lot of our affinity groups were kind of just popping off. Like that was kind of the catalyst for a lot of that action. And I found myself being drawn to that type of work and wanting to make a difference in that way. It was resonated with me as what I felt like I was both good at and had good ideas to do. And then had the opportunity to make a more intentional, take a more intentional dive into this work when I realized that I felt like I had skill sets that would be beneficial to this work, and I had a perspective that would be beneficial to this work, and I wanted to make that intentional pivot in order to have that type of impact. And to Nadia's point, in an industry that I understood, that I had credibility in, that I had established myself in, that I knew more or less the ins and outs of. Obviously, still have a lot more to learn, but at least I was doing it in a place where I had a sense of familiarity. I understood what some of the gaps were. I understood what some of the opportunities were, and I was interested in learning more. I love the industry that I'm in, and that was kind of it for me. It was kind of like, all right, this is what I want to make a transition into. So bless up to Nadia. And I'm just like, I'm very, very grateful to have had that type of experience that got me to where I'm at.
So I think we all know and value representation because, you know, it brings innovation in the office and it sparks new ideas. I just wanted to know any advice that you guys had for how students can take their cultural fluency and make it a competitive advantage.
I'd love to.
That one? Oh, Tiara, you want to take that one?
Yeah.
Cool.
No, go ahead, Darien. I saw you were talking. I can go next.
Okay, sorry, thank you. I just wanted to say really, just because it's something that we're going to be talking about, or then putting programming together for currently for our company, but it's something that's been resonating with me that my current manager had shared. So Caroline Wonga, she's the VP of Diversity and head of HR at Target right now. She has a talk called Authenticity and Who You Are is Non-Negotiable, is the talk. She said something that I thought was very insightful in that from when you're thinking about your cultural fluency, when you're thinking about that sense of authenticity, what it is that you bring to the table, what it is that I bring to the table that truly makes me, you know, different, unique. Like it's like all of that secret sauce, right? That she calls like the fact that I'm a Black man living in America, like that I'm tuned into culture in ways that maybe my white counterparts are not. That part of my cultural fluency is very important, but my main job is to just do my job at like in the beginning anyways. Like I need to establish myself and establish my credibility when I'm just getting started out as a student, especially. That is where I need to focus my attention and intention to show that I can do my job as good as possible. And my secret sauce that takes me over the edge, like everything else that I bring to the table, that is how I bring my sense of authenticity to the work that I'm doing. So I'm not coming in here and like throwing my authenticity all over the walls. It's like, no, like, I'm going to do the job that you hired me to do better than you expected me to, first of all. That's the first thing that I'm going to do. And then second of all, I'm going to then continue to use my understanding and my sense of authenticity to shape, because there's still work to be done, right? And so that's how I can position myself.
For sure. I think you make a great point there that, you know, whenever we're coming into these spaces, I think we really want our voice to be heard, but it's super important that you kind of check off the boxes of what your job description is and what your role is there before you kind of step up and step out to try to, you know, be innovative and think outside the box. So I think that's a great point, Darien. Nadia? Oh, Tiara, I'm sorry.
Tiara, please. Tiara.
Should I go or do you want to go, Nadia?
No, hit it.
Okay.
Tiara.
I would love to expand off of that secret sauce. I think Well, first I'll go back. So I'll mention Vanessa Henley because Nadia already did, but one of my best pieces of advice that I received from her, as well as a service person in our organization, Yumi Sutherland, but they said, master the job that you're in first so you can be prepared for the next opportunity. So definitely always do that first. And then secondly, add your own sauce, add that secret sauce. That's your value add, and that's what makes you different. So those differerences, those different perspectives that you're adding to, whether that be a business strategy or marketing or whatever the case may be, it's adding that secret sauce to differentiate yourself from the rest of the crowd. I think that is amazing, and that's where you really bring your authenticity to work. Whether that be generational, cultural, socioeconomic, orientation, so on and so forth. It definitely lets you stand out and add that value to the position.
So, Nadia?
I've learned the fine art of being silent when things have been said well. So I will say yes and, which is to say, master your skill set, right? Like, so for me as a D&I professional, whether that was in financial services or advertising or law firms, right? It's a really hard road to kind of speak to the challenges of people of color and women, LGBTQ plus, if you are not mastering the work that you were hired to do, right? And so they have to exist together. There's always a premium placed on cultural fluency. I think for anybody in an underserved group working in a predominantly white institution, right? The reality is that we all have that premium in terms of what our fluency, our cultural fluency lens is, and that just kind of exists inherently in who you are. I don't think that has to be played up or played down per se, but it is easily added as an additional premium given when you master your skill set, right? And that for me is, when I walk into places and see who's like successful in particular institutions and have kind of honed their skills and are working on their challenges, right? That is, for me, the marker of someone who has the additional cultural fluency to add as a premium to that skill set.
For sure. And I think it's super important to note that we all have our own secret sauce. And for the students who are watching, I think you have to kind of hone in to, what your expertise is and find your niche so that you can kind of have a unique voice whenever you're in these rooms. So kind of figure out what your secret sauce is. And everyone here says, they swear by it. So I think it's super important for us to figure out that secret sauce. And we've seen examples of campaigns where you can clearly tell that, it wasn't a diverse room, whether it be, the Gucci campaign or whether it be the Pepsi campaign. Do you guys have any of you have an experience where, you felt like there wasn't, a voice in the room or where you had to speak up, or any advice for the students if they're in a situation like that where they need to kind of raise their hand and say, hey guys, I don't think this is going to work?
I'll say that I've had a couple experiences as being the D&I person, particularly in the creative space, where non-creatives have kind of caught whatever cultural gaffe it was, and had to kind of navigate how to interrupt that before it got out and it went the way of this, like the Pepsi moments and the Gucci moments. And I do this as kind of part of my trainings in this space, right? Because it's something that we can talk about bias. It's accessible, particularly when you talk about like campaigns around us, because it's just the noise that surrounds us on a day-to-day, as opposed to talking about it in like civil rights law or in various, in different contexts. For me, it's always like, I'm sure, to your Gucci example, to the Dove example, to whatever, someone raised their hand. I have no doubt in my brain that someone said, right, or H&M or whatever, and they just didn't have the juice to stop it, right? That they didn't have the authority, they didn't, right? Because when you talk about from ideation to execution, how many eyeballs are on a particular thing before it goes out in the world, and for someone in that room. So for me, when leadership challenges this notion of diversity and having just kind of different perspectives at the table, I always use those examples. I'm like, this would not have happened, but if you had more diverse representation, that would not have happened, right? And you bring better ideas and better perspectives, and you create better products and services. So for me, I've had situations where, luckily, because they had someone in like the D&I role who has a level of gravitas and quite frankly a seat at the table, that you're able to broker these conversations, whether with this account and then ultimately the client, to pull these creative missteps before they get out the door. Darien can probably talk to this more, day to day in real life, but again, you just kind of hope that someone is there who can navigate, the landmine, so to speak, of being able to call bias out, quite frankly, when you see it, and stop it from getting out into the world.
And just to expand off that, I think you hit on a really good point of just early on in your career or your time at a company, it's seeking out those personal advisors, mentors, allies at the company, and having those resources to navigate, the corporate systems within that company. What you don't want to do is prematurely address a challenging situation without seeking that counsel first from someone who knows the ropes and how systems work. And then going back to the ENGs, you can reach out to those employee networking groups and see who's on those and talk them through the situation that you might be going through, or the advertising campaign that did not look too well, and how it's been situated in the past, and just navigating those corporate systems. So having that ally, that mentor early on, and connecting with them regularly is key.
Yeah,
I think it's. Oh, go ahead, Darien.
I was just gonna say, I think obviously co-signing all of that, and just in the world that I've been in, and seen how sometimes it has been nipped in the bud proactively or preemptively. I think something to consider for someone who part of your cultural fluency is being able to have a little bit of that radar as far as saying, oh, this probably isn't going to do, or it's going to have some sort of backlash or whatever. I think your role as the person that has that sort of insight is to be very clear about, well, what is the intent, what is the outcome that you want to see happen? Are you just trying to be a crusader that's just like, I'm right about this thing and like y'all should listen to me? Or do you see that there is it is not going to have the outcome that your company and your boss and your all of these people that they care about, and having that sort of insight and foresight, to Tiara's point, do you know who to go talk to who has the clout that you probably don't have just starting off in your career? People have great ideas all the time, but that doesn't mean that why should they listen to you right now? You are still building your cultural capital. You're still building your credibility of that company. You should lean on the people who are in positions of power and build that trust so that you can go to them, especially if they don't have the same cultural fluency that you have, and they can be an advocate alongside you and an ally alongside you. But if your goal is just to be right and just to be able to be like, well, I said that we shouldn't do this, and then they still did it, is that really the outcome, and are you just trying to start an army of one?
Yeah, and definitely a millennial mindset. So very good advice.
For sure. What would you guys say is the most difficult part about your jobs in DEI?
I'm gonna answer this because I think it ties into a question that just came in chat world. So I think for anybody, I'm going to speak as a Black woman, the professional is personal, and it can be exhausting, right? Because you're not just trying to change things for others, right? You're taking this really kind of Herculean task that is, based in systemic inequality, right? And that's really, if you really just want to boil it down to its nuts and bolts. And so I've always started off with the mantra, think big, start small. So I have very left of center ideas of what I think the world should look like, and know that when I walk into highly bureaucratic institutions, that is probably I'm not going to create the largest amount of change, at least not in scale, right? Rome wasn't built in a day, so to speak. But so for me, it is a burnout, right? There was a point in time, I'd say midway, again, I could say this at a certain season, right? But I'm a different vintage. Halfway through my career up until this point, I was just I'm over this, right? This is a lot of work. This is exhausting. What am I doing? I'm not making any headway. I'm trying to overhaul systems that are kind of built to not benefit us. And And then I kind of take a step back, and, you know, one of my mentors to this day is just like, you know, give them a 6, give them a 7. You don't always have to give a 10, right? Which might be counterintuitive to all of us saying like master your skill set, right? But our 7s are really good, y'all. Like, I think that's important to put that out there. Like our 7s. Our 7s are really solid. So for me, I kind of just take a step back and remove the personal, like how personal it was to me. And on the flip side, I guess what kind of is, you know, the carrot, so to speak, is I have a 6-year-old. And it's very important to me that I'm helping to create a world that he will walk into, that there isn't necessarily a chief diversity officer, right? There's not necessarily someone whose like sole job is to build equity into their company's programs and practices, and that it's ultimately something that, you know, everyone takes on in a real way. So that's kind of what I work towards, you know, 20 years from now or however long from now, despite, you know, whatever challenges and hyper negative environment we find ourselves in, you know, just building a better place for for the future. And it sounds hokey, but that helps kind of counteract, you know, the personal being professional and the potential burnout because of these roles.
For sure. I'm going to take a question from the chat. We have Jamara Robinson from Howard University, HU. I'm not from HU, but that's what everybody does whenever they say Howard University. So as an advertising major, I know how small we exist within the industry. Do you know any programs or fellowships that shape advertising marketing professionals of color in fresh out of college?
Yeah, there are a few that you should be looking at right now. AdColor has a program right now called AdColor Futures that has their deadline is on June 5th. So if you are interested in being a part of a program where their sole goal is to provide trainings and also do a bit of that sort of like across level networking opportunities so that you can see more of yourself represented in the industry, knowing how few of us there are in it. That's a great opportunity to look into. Before COVID, this might change, but they did have their large sort of like conference, I believe in LA. They did one in New York. I think it was supposed to be in Georgia this year. So look at them. I would also say check out the MAPE program. That's another good one to consider, pairing you up with internship opportunities and also surrounding you with other students and individuals from underrepresented backgrounds. And also depending on what type of skill set you're looking into, like if it's strategy within the advertising community, there are other programs like Griffin Farley Beautiful Minds that you can look into that are intentionally trying to right the ratio, so to speak, and are intentionally looking to be more to increase their representation of diverse backgrounds.
I have to give a quick plug just because, you know, I'm representing Morgan Stanley here. A lot of people don't know that there are so many different jobs that you can do within finance, and marketing, advertising is one of those things. So you could join an advisor team and do all of their marketing. You can join our corporate world and do our marketing for all of Morgan Stanley firm-wide, advertising, so on and so forth. So our internships actually give you, it's a rotational program where you get access to all of these different fields, and you kind of pick and choose what you want to go into at the end. So just a little heads up on that to our students watching.
Yeah, that's a good call out. Just to add on top of that, like look at companies who you would want to work for, and if they have intentional programs like that, that's another opportunity. It's very important. Oh, and yeah, and Tiara can give you some more information about how to apply for hers specifically.
Yeah, just go on to our job site under positions for recent grads and students, and we have branch analyst positions. So there's a summer position for juniors for juniors who are going to be seniors, and then we have full-time positions for recent grads. And the summer is a 10-week program, and the full-time is 2 years.
So I think a lot of the students know what the need for diversity inclusion is and what the initiative behind it is, but don't know exactly if you choose that as a career, what you do on a day to day or what the work that goes behind that. So you guys can shed some light in what you guys do quarterly on a day to day to kind of meet your goals.
Sure.
Do you want to take?
Yeah, sure. I'll try. So when I am retained, I can talk about this now as a consultant, but it didn't really change as much when I was in-house. So I'll do both. So in-house, when I was at law firms, or I was at Morgan Stanley, I'll take law firms because I know that probably the better than most other industries. I was housed within the attorney development group, which is really the arm made up of former practicing attorneys who were responsible for the career development of all the attorneys in their respective offices, right? So I was housed in New York, except I had a firm-wide remit specifically focusing on women, people of color, and LGBTQ+, potentially differently able, depending on whether or not they openly self-identified, and working on their career development through their years, right? Law firms are highly structured. There are, you know, like performance matrices to which we gauge your performance year over year from first year to second year across practice groups. And as their head of D&I, my job was effectively to make sure that all of these attorneys, the aforementioned kind of demographics, were from their mentorship opportunities, the types of clients that they were working on, the cases, whether or not they were being fully utilized, the type of the work that they were on, et cetera, right? So there was an HR/career development aspect, which is really kind of how I got, those are my D&I druthers. Never mind kind of my foundation in labor and employment law, because obviously worst case scenario, there is some potential claim that you would have to kind of assist in terms of kind of the discovery process of it as the head of D&I. That has served as the foundation, and having done that for about 7 years is really the foundation which I launched out into D&I more broadly with nuances across industry. I will tell you as a consultant, the work that I do, particularly for those companies that do not have a full-time D&I person, which are a lot of companies, right? Like the Morgan Stanley says an army, law firms have teams, but a lot of these newer companies don't have any D&I person, and it's really it's usually punted to the talent people or maybe the L&D person if it has the nuances of a training program. I'm retained to do trainings ranging from bias trainings to manager trainings to the art of giving and receiving feedback to a collaboration, right? Like just the broader L&D opportunities in this space to what I think is a much more strategic retainer, which is where companies and their leadership teams will retain me to help them articulate and formalize their DE&I strategic plan. And so that's been kind of a hard pivot, particularly in this space, as I stepped down to Culture Cipher a couple years ago, to work with talent and or leadership, usually in tandem with both, to say, well, let me kind of figure out what's happening in your company. What are those sore spots? What are the challenges you're having? What are the successes? And put together a strategy, what you need to be, whether it's, you know, a mentorship program, who should be tasked for that? What's the timeline for that? In 3 buckets. And I always should start out this: recruiting and hiring, retention and development, and inclusive culture. And that's no matter the industry for me, right? So if you are fintech or if you are advertising, no matter the industries, that's how I approach it. And I work with them to help build this out, from how to articulate their equity mission statement to how to build out their affinity groups program. That's been my day-to-day bread and butter. But of course I speak being a consultant, and I wanted to reference the law firm practice because that's really that's the foundation element of how I practice equity and inclusion work, no matter the industry.
And Tiara, I know Morgan Stanley has a super, super robust D&I platform, and they're always, you know, out there really doing the work. So I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, sure. So we are actually the only financial institution with a diversity officer in each region of the country. So I cover the Southeast region. My 2 biggest markets are Florida and Georgia. So what we do kind of daily, or you know, it's hard to name everything, but I'll try to give an overview. So obviously recruiting and retention. So recruiting, we go to college campuses. We do things like the C2 Summit. We go to different conferences like National Black MBA, National Sales Network, so on and so forth. And we sponsor different events where there can bring in recruits. We mainly recruit for our advisor population. But then things like the C2 Summit, we focus on our branch analyst programs, both summer and full time. On the retention side, and to also
Can
add
you explain what that means for the students who don't know
the branch analyst?
Right. So like the retention side and the others for the students who don't know.
Recruiting is bringing in diverse talent into Morgan Stanley. So that's why we're here at C2, obviously to share our knowledge with you guys, but also we just want to interact with you guys and share what we're doing at Morgan Stanley. So hopefully you have an interest in going into one of these programs. The retention side is basically keeping those folks within our firm. So our diverse talent that we already have, we want to keep them. So we do that by focusing on leadership training, so getting them ready for their next position. For our advisor population, we help them grow their business. So me and my team, so the other regional diversity officers, would sponsor different events to bring in clients, to bring in books of business for the advisors to help them grow. We also work with them on executive presence and things like of that nature, so they'll be confident when presenting to clients or new prospects. Another thing we do is work with our senior leaders and management to promote inclusiveness within the branches and the offices that they work with. So within my region, something personally that I did was to make sure that every single complex within my region, complexes, so each region is devised of complexes and branches. So I have 10 complexes. And what I did when I entered into my role is to ensure that each complex has a diversity council. So I'm one person for all of Florida, all of Georgia. But with these champions, I can, trickle down the information at the national level so it gets throughout the complexes and branches and everyone feels like they're in an inclusive environment. So those are just some of the things that I do day to day. Obviously, there's a lot more to it. Yeah.
So that definitely provides some color. I hope that the students get something from that. And Darien?
Yeah, it's some similar practices. I would say that one of my main charges is overseeing our internal affinity groups. So these are our grassroots organizations that are designed to provide a supportive environment, but also a collective voice for different subgroups and just like intersectional identities of our workforce. So we have 5 different affinity groups for Black employees, which is called RBG, Red, Black, Green. We have an LGBTQ affinity group, a women's group, a parents group, and an immigrants group. Within that, there are some various subcommittees that are all tasked with, essentially, we work together. That is part of my council on addressing our, what my strategy is broken out into 3 basically buckets, I would say, that all feed into one another: awareness and education, celebration and support, and then action and advocacy. And for me, it's constantly ensuring that there are programs that are working within each one of those buckets that inform one another. So from celebration and support, that's overseeing our key cultural moments that happen throughout the year: Black History Month, Women's Month, Bring Your Kids to Work Day, those types of things, as well as providing opportunities for training for not just our members of the affinity groups, but also leadership, as well as our recruiting teams, working with our recruiting teams from an action and advocacy perspective to ensure that we have policies in place that allow us to be intentional about our hiring practices. And then also working with leadership to bridge that gap between what do our people need and then what do our leaders need to know, and how should we be working in concert to show and demonstrate that the workforce that we are creating a culture around is inclusive, supportive, and equitable for everyone, including people who have historically been underinvested in the past. So it's a lot of conversations. Also, it's a lot of setting metrics. It's a lot of putting action behind the words that we know that need to happen. And it's also, I just want to say to the question before about burnout, it's a lot of emotional labor. And I would say that one of the things that has helped me, I think I'm in that in-between period where I can see the burnout on the horizon, but I'm able to keep it at bay. I think because I'm privileged to be doing this work at a time where we have language around more language around mental health and emotional well-being, where I can talk about emotional labor. I can talk about what I need to do to preserve my mental well-being so that I am not burning myself out at a time when I know that I'm also being relied upon for types of support. So it's the same sort of analogy of when you're in a plane and it's going down, you need to put the oxygen mask on yourself first. I have to figure out ways to give myself oxygen in order for me to be of any use to any of the people that I'm tasked with serving.
And thank you for that, Darren, because that was literally my next question. You know, and Charity John Jackson actually put this question in the chat, so I want to shout her out. But she said the work is so important, but because the work is so important, it can be draining. And this is only amplified given our current socio and political environment. What are some of the ways that you have remained committed to the goals of diversity, inclusion, and belonging and prevented personal burnout? So I definitely, you know, we heard from you, Darren, but I definitely want to hear from the ladies because that's an amazing, amazing question.
Yeah, I don't think, I think I semi-answered this before. I just, for me, it's not really an option, right? I guess you know, it's horrible to kind of say like pre-COVID, post-COVID, right? But like really kind of tending to yourself, right? In a way that, you know, again, we're tackling large historical, you know, systematic inequality that happens to rear its face in our respective industries, but it's something that, you know, again, we speak from a lofty position of kind of, you know, chomping away at Morgan Stanley versus like chomping away in like social justice and prison reform, right? For example, right? And not to compare, I don't want to complain, I don't want to engage in oppression Olympics, but it's definitely like, look, I'm here trying to overhaul a certain, you know, systemic change in a highly bureaucratic organization. I'm gonna do everything I can. And it used to be when I was, you know, and sorry, I'm going to, you know, become ageist, but like reverse ageism. When I was Darien's age, right? When I was young, it was, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to go hard in the paint every day, all the time, right? Like, because it meant, like I said, the personal is professional. And now it's like, I'm going to do everything I can. And I'm going to try not to take it home with me because I'm surrounded by bullshit, pardon my French, like on television. And so let me just take a deep breath and like tend to my well-being, to, you know, to Darien's kind of point of putting oxygen on before you attend to others. Me and my son are oxygenated, so to speak. You know, work out, try to eat well, see your friends, enjoy your family and loved ones, right? Because it is exhausting. There are days that you come home and you're like, what am I doing, right? Just banging your head up against a wall. And it's hard, but, you know, again, think big, start small. And that really helps ground you as you kind of take on this work.
I mean, you said it greatly. I guess the best thing is balance, you know, just keeping that balance. Like you said, making time for yourself to work out and for self-care, so on and so forth. But another thing that I would love to echo is just, you know, starting small. Like our strategy at Morgan Stanley is just building that pipeline. It's not going to happen overnight. We're going to recruit, you know, these interns straight out of college. They're not ready for these senior level positions, but hopefully when I pass the baton to the next person, they'll be ready. The person that I put into an internship role will be ready for a complex manager role or something like that. So it's always thinking small, looking at the smaller picture and how you're going to grow that. And it's really about pipelining these individuals and getting them into seats and helping them develop. And that's what really keeps me going every day, is just seeing the folks that we put into maybe these entry level positions and then seeing how much they grow. So that really gives me motivation to keep going every day.
That's awesome. That's super awesome. My next question is, how has your business been affected by what's happening, you know, in the world right now with COVID? We know that Black people and people of color are statistically being affected by what's happening more than other communities. So I just wanted to hear how that might be affecting your work.
For us, we've actually, being in wealth management, it's actually a blessing because people are really seeking financial advice during this time. So our advisors are doing well in that regard, just bringing in new clients and being able to give sound advice during these times, especially with unemployment and so on and so forth. And then, you know, two other things just on the charity level is that our CEO made a promise to us that there would be no layoffs this year. And then we also gave sizable amounts to COVID reliefs to Black and Brown people, to Asian Americans, Hispanics, so on and so forth. So we've been very fortunate.
I can kind of speak to, having a small business. So that's like the additional layer now. On one hand, there were a handful of companies, not surprisingly, depending on the industry, who had to kind of, reset, rejigger, both on scale of their human population, and really figure out kind of where their industries were going to focus, right, and the pivot that they were going to make. So there was a lag in time, so to speak, where, and understandably so, where there's kind of like, let's, guns blazing, let's move forward with our D&I plans. And it was like, hold on a second, we have to kind of figure out the state of the business. So there was definitely a pause with some industries. Other industries, like I can think of my clients in the academy, for example, right? Although they've had to pivot for sure to a virtual space, they are still very much moving forward in the equity inclusion space. And so those clients that I have in the academy are still kind of pushing forward, figuring out how to create that sense of community and belonging, if only, via Google Hangouts and Zoom meetings or Microsoft Teams. And then I will tell you now, I can kind of, now that it's 2 months in, which is even bananas to say, a lot of clients now kind of having had to right size based on their economic realities that we're all facing, have resurfaced in a very real way, asking to focus on not only, their equity inclusion as we traditionally understand it, but also having this broader conversation around mental health and wellness and sense of belonging, right? And really kind of playing into this, I think, what is a real notion of like, we're all in this together, but with the particular lens of D&I. So over the past, maybe a couple weeks, and now I just see like this uptick of clients who have, again, kind of weathered at least the first part of what's been happening thus far, and have resurfaced to kind of to partner with me in the consulting space around their equity inclusion initiatives.
Yeah, I think what's very interesting to note, we all know that the current economic realities are not revealing any new problems. It's just exacerbating old ones. And part of that are the realities for Black and Brown, Indigenous, people of color, right? And but what is happening right now is that you have people who have previously been able to ignore this, right? Like, to an ignorance is bliss sort of perspective, it didn't affect them in any sort of way. To Nadia's point, mental health and wellness, like, there are people who are now trying to figure out, like, how do I balance, like, I need to take care of my family, I need to do a job, I need to like do all of these things, like, I'm losing my mind. And there are people who have been doing this for quite some time. And so this this intentional focus on how can we support our parents, how can we support people from a mental health perspective, that doesn't mean that we are looking at taking an intersectional lens to diversity and inclusion does not mean that we forget about the people who are affected disproportionately still. It's just a matter of, okay, we should be very cognizant of, yes, we now understand how this affects all of us, and it now gives us a little bit more insight as to how it is affecting those who have historically been impacted even harder for quite some time. So I think that there is what we're seeing also for people who are choosing to pay attention, and for the voices who are keeping it top of mind, that there is a different type of cognizance and awareness that there needs to be very intentional care that is taken for women of color, for parents of color, for indigenous families. Like, it is not just, oh, we're going to focus on mental health now. It's just like, yes, you can do that, but it's like, and so be aware of how mental health of Black people is being affected during this crisis. When socially, you're still seeing bodies being taken not just from a virus, but from systemic racism. These are all things that are compounding. It is additive. And that is what I think companies have an opportunity, and leaders have an opportunity to really show, when they care about their people, they are aware of the things that their people care about.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to take a question from the chat. Ozioma Nawachku, if I pronounce that wrong, forgive me. Hello, as a diversity professional, what advice would you give to international students trying to transition from the school environment into the professional world, seeing as we are not just restricted by our color, but also by international status?
It's a hard one.
Yeah, the question is it and I don't know if the person who asked the question is still here, but can I ask just for point of clarification, is it a question of actually just introduction to the workforce as an international student translate, or is it the additional layer of introduction to the workforce as a D&I person?
As an international student. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So like as a student trying to transition into the professional world, you're applying for jobs that you know you're qualified for, and there's this challenge of sponsorship and all that. Apart from being a Black person already, and you have this issue of companies saying, "Oh, we can't afford to sponsor you for this," and then you end up losing out on so many opportunities that are available, but because of your international status, you cannot get those opportunities. So like, when I saw this diversity and belonging panel, I decided to join here because like it's something I've been struggling with personally, and so I wanted to find out what your take is as will be as diversity professionals. Like, what advice would you give? Because like it's really daunting, like trying to, you know, you're qualified for this, you work hard, and because of your international status, you are not able to get opportunities.
And I guess to expand on that, whenever you guys are looking for employers from a D&I perspective, are you guys looking at it differently? Like, do you guys recruit international people for different projects, or does it change your initiatives? Or is it, as an international student, is there any competitive advantage whenever they're coming into the D&I professional space?
Gosh, so I'm going to be candid and hopefully give some, tactical advice in this space. So one, I cannot even imagine, irrespective of international status and need of sponsorship, entering a job market at this moment. So I just empathize with that as just a very kind of hard road regardless. And then obviously adding that I'm assuming you're a woman of color. If I'm wrong, forgive my ethnographic mistake. But I guess for me, there's two things at play. My advice that I'll give: one, the larger the company, the more likely they're going to be able to, they're still going to continue their sponsorships, right? So I can tell you just from, being 43 years old, that the reality is smaller companies have all but kind of at the very least paused their sponsorship for visa purposes, for work purposes, right? Whether that's an H-1B or whatever. And obviously the political context of the United States is not ideal either. So the bigger the company, the better chance you would get for a sponsorship opportunity. As it relates to kind of the pivot in the D&I space, and I can say this from like a global lens, right? Like I have a global, and I know Darien has the kind of a global lens as well, of approaching D&I that is highly nuanced depending on, the global landscape. That's a harder, again, I'm going to be candid, that's a harder sell, particularly as an entry level into the D&I space, right? Because one of the ties that bind between me and Tiara and Darien right now is that we all came from the industry in which we worked before we went into the equity and inclusion space, right? And my first gig after practicing was to be head of D&I at a law firm, right? Tiara came from financial services. She's a financial. Darien was a strategist. So there's a level of gravitas that comes with both and credibility that comes with your experience within a particular org, unless you're going into like the HR world, right? Because oftentimes HR and D&I are inextricably, and I, from my perspective, rightfully so, bound with one another. So an entry level role, short of a coordinator role or an administrative role, which are real and are harder to come by for sure, particularly in the sponsorship space, right? Because there are going to be sponsorship limitations on the level, right, that you're walking into is a difficult one. I would say, figure out the industry that you want to go into. Like D&I is not necessarily as much as we want to call it like an industry. Again, the tie that binds, at least for these panelists, is that we all grew up within that industry and then became the equity inclusion professional. And so my pivot in this space, to the best of my ability to empathize with you, is to kind of figure out what industry you'd like to go into or like to learn. And that can be from the lens of equity inclusion, whatever challenges they may face. And the larger the institution, the better, because to go to sponsorship capabilities, and then build yourself up within that org. That's the that would be my approach. You can throw that in the trash, but that's what I would think of when I saw your question.
No, that's awesome, Nadia. And to kind of spark something from that, you also mentioned earlier that a lot of companies don't even have a D&I department yet. So if you are at a company where you feel like you want your company to kind of pick up more responsibility in that space, what is your advice for kind of speaking up and either, building that role out yourself, or just speaking up and saying that something that you want your company to do more of?
So this is where allies for me, and I'm kind of mindful of the word choice, but there's even if you don't have a department per se, there is someone, right? So whether in leadership or a manager who has taken this on in a, of their own accord, and I would seek that person out, right? Because that is, it's strength in numbers, right? Not to be like gladiator like, but strength in numbers, right? So if you have a group of people, whether that's women or people of color or a manager that has kind of like been, vocal in that space, I see kind of those smaller companies turning to, and this is being honest, so to the young woman who asked the question, please connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to chat with you further. A lot of companies that have retained my services, right, are kind of asking for, help us put this together, because we've had people, kind of chomp at the bit, and there is kind of tailwind in that space, because I affectionately call myself a sister outsider, right? I'm not within the org, but you have kind of the muscle there to do so, and they need outside help. So that's been the inside kind of, group that's, kind of pushing at the margin, so to speak. And them saying, hey, if y'all can't take it on HR or leadership, like you all should hire a consultant who can come into that space. It does not need to be me. I have a million people I can reference, but I think that helps for particularly those smaller orgs where you want to see some type of sustainable change begin.
Yeah. Definitely just that building block analogy. Just like I said before, I tried to put those councils in place for each of my complexes. You're one person, but if, like you said, there's strength in numbers. If you have those champions in each part of my region or each part of the company that you're trying to help out, you guys can come together with ideas, perspectives, so on and so forth. So
I would just retweet everything that that both of you have said, and in addition to that, for you, when you're thinking about the people, what is the outcome that you want to have happen? Is it that you want to see change happen for people that look like you, for people with backgrounds similar to yours? What assumptions are you making about those experiences? As Black people, we're not a monolith, right? And not all Black people at a firm are necessarily going to kiki over this type of stuff. But do you have people that want to gather and who want to make change? Do you have like-minded people in that sense who are willing and wanting to get together with you to talk about the change that you can make and the things that you can do? Start there. It's okay to start grassroots. And obviously you're still courting your allies, you're still building those connections, but you also want to have a group of people that you can go to who you can talk about the shit when shit gets shit, but also where you can come up with ideas together. And that collective voice that you have is one of the ways that you can start to mobilize the initiatives that you want to see made real. So do not discount the people around you in order to try to make some sort of impression on the people above you. You can mobilize together in order to have a mightier impact.
and with that group, make sure it's diverse so you have those different perspectives. So.
Well, awesome. I have one more question for you guys. We're going to wrap it up soon because our session is ending. But before I ask that last question, just want to say huge thank you to Morgan Stanley and Microsoft. You guys have been amazing partners in making this happen on the culture creator side. Really, really, really pushing and helping students get opportunity that they deserve. So big shout outs to you guys. And our last question is, do you guys have any books or anything that you guys can recommend to the students to kind of read up and prepare for careers in this field?
Renee Myers, I have to give a shout out to my mentor. So I don't like reading D&I books because I feel like they're so, I don't also do like self-help stuff, right? It's not my jam, I'm being honest.
You guys even if it's not, D&I related, like any books that you guys have read that you feel like really shaped who you guys are as professionals that you think the students should pick up, any must reads?
Paul Beatty, who's a Black male fiction writer who has some great satirical novels on race, White Boy Shuffle, Tough, Slumberland. He's he's amazing, Paul Beatty. If I had to say, like, you know, to get your, like, the book that like shaped me in The Fire Next Time, you know, Baldwin's kind of repertoire, you know, anything, the Toni Morrison, like Playing in the Dark and Literary Images of Whiteness. I could do this forever. But anything Morrison or Baldwin related is a good foundation that will kind of help get you thinking about the larger issues that are at play here.
I'm gonna keep mine real simple, and it's actually like, you know, like Nadia said, it's not related to D&I because I don't typically read those books. But to stick on the wealth management side, to just give you that tidbit, it is the most basic, probably book that everybody knows, but it is so amazing when it comes to beginners who are trying to manage finances and learn their way through, you know, starting in corporate America and building wealth. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That's it.
Oh yeah, that's a classic, you guys. If you haven't read that, make sure you pick that up.
That is it.
Fun.
I feel like every like dad of color like forced that book on their kids.
That
like we all have a story. Yeah.
There we go.
I would add I would just co-sign all of that. Like, yeah, the books that I'm reading, I think it's about the issues. It's not about like the issue of diversity and inclusion. And so it's I would say that books like Ta-Nehisi Coates's like Between the World and Me, like understanding like the relationship of Black men in this country and fatherhood. I would say Damon Young's book, What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker. I would say Invisible Man, Got the Whole World Watching, amazing. All of the authors that Nadia mentioned and Tiara mentioned, I think we should just make a little book club list, reading list for the folks. A little collab list, I think would be interesting. I'm like looking at my bookshelf and I was like trying to spy yours too, Nadia, like what you've got back there.
Right.
Yeah. So I would say like read the stuff. It's the stuff that matters. Like it's not about necessarily like a practitioner handbook, but it's like who are the aforementioned, like the people at the forefront who have been talking about this stuff for however long, who have shaped, you know, movements. Those are the places and the people that I think we draw a lot of our inspiration from, because those are the issues that matter, and we're just happen to be working within our small industries where we have the control that we have in order to make things better, not just for ourselves and the people around us, but hopefully for the people that come after us.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. You students, you guys have your homework. They gave you a lot of great books to read up on after this. Really appreciate you guys, and be sure to keep looking at the C2 Summit throughout the week. We continue to have a lot of more panels to tune into and learn from. So thank you guys for tuning in.
Thank you, panelists. Nice to have all of you. Nice to see all of you.
Great to meet you, Tiara.
Bye. Great to meet you.
All right, y'all.